Today we have a really interesting interview with Frank Sondors, who is the CEO and founder of Salesforge, InfoForge, MailForge, and WarmForge. He's built his SaaS company portfolio to 2 million ARR in 11 months, and he's going to break down how he did it, a little bit of his story, and also some insights into what he sees performing best in cold email, having access to so much data. So it's going to be a good interview today. Make sure to stick around. And as always, if you do want to learn more about Frank, his links are in the description. All right, everybody, welcome to the YouTube channel. Today we have Frank coming on to talk about Salesforge and other software tools he's building. Frank, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been around the block for a while. We've been doing, tech sales for over a decade, and yeah, good to be here on the show.
Awesome. Well, the first question I ask everybody, regardless of who they are, is who are you and what you do? So I'd love to hear in your kind of brief bio for people that are just getting into this conversation, maybe they haven't heard of you before. Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, so you could look at me just as as a sales guy. So I started my career back in my days at Google, selling a bunch of advertising. And then since then, I moved to work for a lot of SaaS companies, whether that's SimilarWeb, BlackRow, Intent, Watergraph, leading a sales team of 50. And then I thought that the next stepping stone should be really starting my own SaaS business. And guess what? It had to be a sales tech company. And yeah, so we launched a company that's called Salesforge. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. And then it is something I've launched about 30 months ago or so. And then since then, we launched 4 other Forges. So it's like a Forge ecosystem. And so we offer infrastructure right now, warm-up that's separate. So yeah, everything that has to do with email, improving email deliverability before we embark to the sort of next frontier, whether that's LinkedIn or voice.
Awesome. And for people listening, could you give a brief overview of what the 4 companies are and what they do?
Sure. So it's actually one company, just 4 different brands. So the first one is Salesforge. So Salesforge allows you to send a unique email in any language to a recipient at any scale. So we programmatically look at what do you sell as a business, and then we do web crawling. So we have the ability to access the website, LinkedIn, a bunch of other sources, match those 2 data sets together, and then do a computation and send out a great email out to your prospects. Then we aggregate actually all that data. You can use API if you want to, etc. So that's product 1. So that's Salesforge. Now, then we shipped MailForge about 7 months ago or so, and MailForge provisions email infrastructure. So that means domains and mailboxes, something that you probably do on GoDaddy with Gmail and Outlook accounts. But we do that through a sort of dedicated solution on the shared IP pool. So it's a similar concept to Gmail and Outlook, and essentially allowing you to set up in about 5 minutes. So if you're an agency, imagine setting up your infrastructure in 5 minutes post-call with a client, like super, super duper easy. And then we launched InfoForge, another product. So instead of using a shared IP pool, it uses a dedicated IP. So that's the third product. And so very similar experience, so 5 minutes setup. And then the final product, which is our own sort of dedicated warm-up solution called WarmForge.ai. WarmForge allows you to naturally improve your deliverability through really good warm-up, check your DNS, check the blacklists, and then we're looking to build a bunch of other cool stuff in WarmForge. So we're looking to become one of the top choices in the market for warm-up and essentially warming up the whole sort of ecosystem of cold email infrastructure. So yeah.
Awesome.
So, and then, yeah, we're looking to build, I guess, a few more Forges over the next 12 months. So it's going to be really what we call an ecosystem of solutions, and you only pick whatever you want to use. And by doing so, and by sort of working with a single vendor, you're going to have a much better experience. And also overall, I guess, when you're paying for your tool stack, it's also going to be a lot more cost effective long term. So, because we see this huge sort of bloat in the ecosystem, there's a lot of different solutions, and typically they raise us a lot of money. Then you have to sort of stitch them together, and we just don't believe in that world. We call that the Android experience. So we're building the Apple-like experience where, just like an Apple, let's say you have Apple ID to log into different sort of products and whatever softwares and stuff like that. It's very similar here at Salesforge. We have a Forge ID where you log into different sort of softwares and they talk natively with each other.
Yeah, I like the concept of building the ecosystem. That's quite cool. Now, I'm curious, stepping back a little bit, how did you go from working in tech and in sales to starting this? What was the pivot there like?
Good question. So I think it has to do with my previous gig. So I used to be a VP sales at a startup called Watergraph. I led them from seed to Series A. I had a sales team of about 50. And this is where I saw that really the only lever to target the table was just to hire a bunch more reps. And I thought that model is broken kind of going forward. So we're seeing that with how also the ecosystem right now is evolving. And so we're big believers in leaner and meaner teams going forwards. And actually, this is something that we're looking to accelerate and also give every essentially company the highest probability to hit their target. So we're building also a lot of data components behind the scenes to help the companies to essentially achieve their targets in a lot sort of smarter way, because we're not sort of big believers in what we call rules-based execution. So if you look at sort of systems like Google Ads, in Google Ads you set a bid, for example, right, and then the auction executes, and then you get you get a particular position in the rankings, and then that user may convert, may not convert, and everything's sort of rules-based. And today, majority of the campaigns in Google Ads are machine learning-based. That's exactly the sort of transformation we'll be enabling in the world of Salesforge as our sort of mothership product. So yeah, it was essentially my own experience and the pain observing essentially leading a large sales team, and then also kind of having a look back in the days, when I used to be part of a sales team and what sort of people I worked with. And essentially, I hired, hundreds of people and also fired hundreds of people. And typically I would say that for every 10 people that you hire, one is a natural, like literally one max. And then about 2 to 3 people can be trained up to be somewhat as good as the person that's really natural. And then 60% is literally what's called dead wood. So that dead wood is what we're looking to eliminate from the ecosystem. So why people hire a bunch more reps, even though they're not really designed to be sort of salespeople? The reason why they hire you have a sales target, right, as a VP sales. And typically when you do sort of your modeling for the year ahead, you're like, okay, I need this many reps, this many bodies to achieve my target. And I think that's broken. Like, this software should be scaling. And when you look at these dinosaur solutions out there, like for example, Outreach or Sales Lab, a bunch of a few other ones, they optimize for more headcount, more bodies, right? And that's how they make their money, because they charge per license. Whereas I'm a big believer that you just want to have these 40% of folks out there in the sales team, but you want to increase their output significantly. So that's where the software has to do the legwork. So from ground up, we're building that sort of software, that ecosystem sort of forges that will enable to achieve that. So essentially reduce headcount in sales and still achieve much greater output per rep. So that's what we believe where the world is headed. And there's also other solutions right now in the sales tech ecosystem that are trying to do something similar. So that we're just part of that sort of transformation right now.
It is amazing the cost savings a company can have going from old school email to automated. And it's kind of, I think we live in this cold email bubble where we think that everybody does this stuff, but occasionally they'll take on an enterprise client where they have 30, 40 sales reps and are literally handwriting emails and sending them from the same domain. So there's still a lot of transformation to take place, especially in these older bureaucratic companies where change is really painful. So, I can imagine getting a sales team to cut down, a few salaries that are probably bloated anyway and use your tool could make a lot of sense. So with that in mind, do you plan on working a lot more big corporates, or where do you see your user base being, or is it everybody?
So we started, I think like most startups start in the SMB space. So working with sort of pre-seed, seed, series A stage startups, also working with accelerated startups like YC, Antler, etc. And then so that's like one segment for us. And then the other segment for us is essentially agencies or in consultants, essentially the folks that typically have to build the pipeline for the startups. And typically they do that in a lot of the cases through cold email. So we decided to kind of stick with cold email really before we embark to unlocking the other channels within the software. We're definitely going to do that because we're big believers in things like multi-threading, multi-channel, all that stuff. But in the early days, when you're launching your own startup, you need to focus. And we definitely saw that email is the largest market, but also has this sort of largest problem, which is email deliverability. And yes, there's other sort of competitors of ours that are trying to solve that problem. We're going to be solving that in a different sort of way. And yeah, for now, focusing on the SMB, because naturally if you're targeting SMBs in the early days, they're more prone to introduce this sort of newer tech, whereas the sort of enterprise companies, they require you to do sort of SOC 2 compliance and many other things. We just can't afford to do that, or we don't have time to do that as an early stage startup. But yeah, I would say as of next quarter or the next couple of quarters, we're definitely going into what we call the mid-market enterprise segment and going essentially after the companies that have, very large sales teams. That's how we're going to be sort of targeting the companies. And yeah, when you have, more than 5, say, SDRs, that's, already sort of an ICP for us, I would argue. So this is how we're going to be looking at that. But our tech can be used not just to sort of, minimize headcount, but naturally also to increase output significantly in email. But the dilemma naturally, like I mentioned, because we only focus on email, And typically mid-market enterprise companies also expect you to do, say, LinkedIn and have the ability to cold call. That also sort of blocks you to convert that prospect, right? So it's a bit tricky when you're trying to go up market having only one single channel. So this is why you need to really unlock the other two major channels if you want to go up market. So this is why it's going to pressure our team, engineering team, product team, to unlock these two other channels so that we can go up market much faster. But yeah, there's definitely appetite also to have, for example, Salesforge as a complementary sort of solution on top of, say, their outreach or sales loft, their kind of core sales engagement platform. And the reason for that is because these two softwares, they don't really optimize for email deliverability. That's not the segment that they want to sort of play in. So this is why this sort of segment sort of any software company that sort of solves email deliverability is up for grabs. So essentially that means because we're solving that problem, many companies are happy to have outreach or sales loft and then in tandem also Salesforge to essentially solve their email deliverability. So we're seeing also appetite for things like that. Yeah, I would say it's going just generally really well for the business. And because I'm a former VP sales, it's very easy to build rapport essentially with any VP sales out there because we speak the same language. We drop, keywords like, CAC or CAC efficiency, CAC payback, and FTEs and all these sort of acronyms out there, right? So, and it's much easier. So if you come from the sales background, or if you used to run sales teams, or if you used to be a board member or a CLO, et cetera, it's just much easier for you to have these conversations with companies up market. But your product has to be ready. It has to be sort of enterprise ready to enter.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's funny you mention that because we have a couple clients where they used to be a certain role, but they now target, and just name dropping that has been a huge bump in conversion compared to someone who can't do that. So I'm sure that's going to help, you on an ongoing basis. Now, one thing I'm just super curious about, you have access to so much cold email data. And as someone who obviously sends cold email for a living, that just sounds really exciting. So obviously I know you can't give away all the secrets, but having access to all this data, are there any core attributes or principles that you see across the majority of winning campaigns that people listening could implement on?
So it really depends on your ICP in a lot of the cases, and whether your ICP is using, whether that's Gmail, Outlook. So there's quite a lot of variables that goes into having successful sort of cold email campaigns. But a few of the things that I typically say to every sort of customer that I onboard, and I onboard still today a lot of customers, personally myself, is keep things like short and snappy. So let's say the subject line, 2 or 3 keywords. Literally it's very short and snappy, 2 or 3 words in a subject line, and keep the initial email as short as possible. So about 50-60 words. So essentially, typically the shorter your email, the better performance that we're seeing. And naturally, soft call to action rather than a hard CTA, asking for time and things like that. Then also removing HTML. So that also means removing open rate tracking and click rate tracking when you're stripping out HTML. So essentially, you're sending emails what's called as plain text emails. We're seeing that does drive up the performance. So if you're not looking at open rates, you're typically looking at reply rates. So you see typically about anywhere between 10 to 20% lift versus the baseline. So we're seeing that as well. And actually, the other thing that we're seeing, what typically works really well, and this is when you have, maybe smaller TAM, is when you actually do multi-threading. So when you're engaging with more than one prospect, more than one stakeholder within the company, either sequentially or in parallel, and that also increases the overall likelihood of succeeding with that particular account. So a lot of people think like, oh, let me just, prospect one single contact at that particular company. I would say, typically engage with 2 or 3. Try and craft, don't send the same template, but try and craft essentially a unique email to every single individual. Because a lot of people share emails internally. When they see that the same template was sent to a lot of people, it will backfire. So things like that. Of course, kind of other maybe kind of simpler things like, how many emails you should send to a prospect. So if you have a large TAM, so let's say tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of potential customers, I typically recommend only sending 2 emails in total. So one initial email and then a follow-up email to that. And that's just, simply because the probability of reply after the second email or the third email, it just drops massively off the cliff. And then the other reason is the probability of receiving a spam report significantly increases with every additional email that you send, right? So you want to make sure you're protecting your email infrastructure and you're not getting too many spam reports against your infrastructure. So I would say the most sophisticated folks in the space typically send 2 emails, and I actually send 2 emails myself to a prospect. And then if a prospect did not opt out from the list and didn't potentially reply back, then I would re-engage after a quarter. So it's also called as recycling, lead recycling. Essentially, you engage with the same list, our ICP list for the second round. And typically, over the course of a year, I typically recommend reaching out 3 to 4 times to your ICP. I don't see a reason why not. And the reason why you're doing that is because the biggest problem now on sales generally is the timing. So to predict when's the best time to reach out, even though you have trigger data or intent data, you don't really always know when's a good time to engage, because the pain that you're trying to solve for a particular prospect has to be prioritized typically in that particular quarter, typically. And priorities can change on a quarterly basis, just like OKRs. And this is why it's a good sort of system that you can build out where you're sort of always top of mind, where you're kind of, touching base with a prospect at least once a quarter. So I've seen that working like really well, but you kind of have to strategize really and kind of think about, how big your TAM is and how, frequently you want to be engaging. But yeah, one of the maybe things that you definitely want to optimize sort of long term is like, how do you minimize the number of any spam reports that you're getting from your list? Right? Because you really have to think about the health of the infrastructure. And most people that think about the health of the infrastructure by working on the list, copy, how frequently they reach out, right? Whether they clean the list and minimize the bounces, many other things. Those are the folks that are consistently successful. And those folks that don't do sort of campaign hygiene and many other things, those are the people that typically sort of fail, or they will fail eventually because essentially your infrastructure deteriorates over time, and then after some time it just drops right off the cliff, like your deliverability. So yeah, and this is why having sort of somebody that looks after your deliverability week in, week out is like super important. Whether that's somebody in-house or SDR lead or an agency that looks after your health of your infrastructure is like super important these days. So yeah, I know I blabbered a bit, but hopefully this gave some insight.
So that was very helpful. And 2 things I'd like to emphasize there that I really agree with, I want to make a big point on, is 1, reaching out to multiple people in the company. You mentioned don't do the same messaging. What we do is we have like different avatars. We have, if a product, for example, applies differently to tech titles, operations titles, sales titles, and let's say human resources titles, adapt your script to each. Another little tip we've done here is in our follow-up, we'll say something like, would there be somebody better to ask in our team, such as name drop 1 or name drop 2? And that can do really well because you kind of assert yourself in an organization. And everything you mentioned on just deliverability being one of the main things. It's funny, as a cold email, when I first got into this space doing it for other people, I thought that I would be solving like cool copywriting and offer problems. It's 95% people that are just in spam. We have people book a call of us, and it's always the same thing. It's not always, but very often. Cold email worked great for 2 weeks. Week 3, it slowed down. Week 4, it slowed down. Month 2, we got no calls. Do you think I should change my offer? And no one's offer goes from relevant to irrelevant in 2 months. It's deliverability. It's always, I did no deliverability practices. I know my audience, I know my copy, but after a month, I'm just in spam, but I don't know it. So, I can definitely emphasize with you there that for most people, deliverability is going to be where they eventually fail if they don't give it proper attention.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I mean, deliverability wasn't really a big topic, I would say maybe 2 years ago or so. And then it really became like a huge, huge topic. And a lot of companies are waking up. A lot of companies are saying cold email is dead. They're just giving up on it because they don't know that they can actually fix that deliverability. They just think, just dead, that's it, because Gmail and Outlook changed the rules of the game. But because they changed the rules of the game, you have to adjust because, there's many good reasons why, people like you are still super successful, because you have adjusted and you have to adjust. And also the software has to adjust. This is why, there's a lot of dinosaur softwares that have not adjusted. And, their take on the whole sort of topic of deliverability is that it's the company's essentially responsibility to solve the deliverability. Whereas the way we look at deliverability, it's our responsibility to help our customers to solve deliverability. Because first of all, typically SDRs in every company, they're not just savvy enough to solve deliverability. That's problem 1. Problem 2 is most companies in the world, like 99% of them, do not have a deliverability expert in the company. And neither, I would argue, they should hire one. And then the engineering team, of course, you could give it to the engineers and say, please solve that. But also they're not super knowledgeable about, the topic of email deliverability, and neither they want to dabble into that at all. This is why there's sort of this conundrum that every company has about deliverability, and this is why really the software has to solve that. But of course, this is why there's a lot of, really knowledgeable agencies like you guys are out there that, help customers to solve that. But otherwise, they would not solve that typically on their own. Of course, there's a bunch of blog posts and checklists, etc., that they can maybe kind of read through. But it's not just that, especially if you have burned your primary domain, right? So then you need to recover that, and then you need to realize, oh, I have to buy, a bunch of secondary domains. So we're definitely going through this shift, and I think there's still a lot of companies are waking up towards this sort of new reality of the fact that you should not be sending, cold emails from primary. You should be setting up this sort of, secondary infrastructure to execute your campaigns.
It's funny you mentioned, because what we found is the engineers could figure out, but they don't want to because it's not their job. And the sales guy's a sales guy. He's not a tech guy. So it's just this weird gap where, if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, this sounds like something I want to do, there is such a big opportunity to help companies get set up on proper infrastructures right now. It's a great business model, and it's what we do. And I feel like we have like 10 competitors, because most people just don't go for deliverability as their service. They go for sales enablement, or whatever you want to call it, more of a creative approach. So, if you're listening to this and you're a tech guy, there's a lot of opportunities to help companies get integrated to a tool like Salesforge, or just any infrastructure beyond sending from their primary domain. I mean, people are still doing mail merges. It's amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just literally actually spoke to a client today. This is not me making up. Literally spoke to a customer today, this morning, where the reason why they booked a call with us is because their IT team doesn't want to move a finger. So they were literally just, trying to find how they're going to solve this infrastructure dilemma. They don't want to be setting up these bunch of domains and mailboxes. And neither the rep is knowledgeable enough. So he was like an SDR lead or something. But it had to be solved, right? So they definitely want this problem to go away, as in the problem is like, hey, I need to set it up and these domains, and you're just gonna be normal sort of mainstream thing that every company is going to be doing as we progress into the future. Yeah, I'm just very curious as to what's going to be the sort of Gmail's and Outlook's reaction kind of long term, because we're betting essentially on the fact that Gmail and Outlook are cracking down on cold email. So they have introduced restrictions. We expect more restrictions to be introduced, and my take is at which point is it so painful to be running sort of cold emails from Gmail and Outlook that you're just not doing it anymore? So it's a question of, when, not if, this is going to happen. So we definitely, see this kind of huge sort of, let's call it appetite for Google to crack down on this. And the problem just generally is that it's not just about the good cold emailers and kind of, enabling businesses still to prospect and acquire new business. But there's also a lot of bad actors in the ecosystem that are popping up that send ransomware. They're trying to penetrate enterprise-grade companies, right, and stuff like that. So Gmail also sees these bad actors, not just more emails overall every single year. So they have to do something about this. So it will impact the good guys. But guess what? Just like in cold email, you are setting up additional Gmail accounts. Also, the bad actors are setting up these additional accounts. So yeah, I'm just very curious as to how this sort of whole landscape will sort of evolve with the next 12 to 36 months. We believe there is a major changes that will happen.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And the way I tell a lot of people about this is, if I'm going back, I've been sending cold emails now for about 9 years. I'm very lucky I got in it very early. And it used to be that it was hard to send cold emails, but deliverability wasn't a thing. Now it's easy to send cold emails, but deliverability is a thing. So it's just, you make it easier, more people do it, and then they clamp down on it, right? I mean, even a good example of this is, 4 years ago, every cold email tool would charge you per email address. So it's really expensive to scale volume. But because of that, there wasn't as much cold email volume. And then cold email tools came in and they made volume accessible and affordable, which has made deliverability harder. So there's always going to be changes. And like you mentioned before, it's, are you willing to experiment, try new things, and adapt, or are you just going to do the same thing you've been doing and be outpaced? So I like the mindset you guys have going into the new changes that are going to be coming up, and I think it's quite exciting. Now, as a final question here, actually second to final question here, Frank, what is the goal of this? You're building these companies that are connecting together, you're solving really big problems. What is your personal goal of this?
I'm always like an SDR. It doesn't matter what I'm a CEO, etc. I'm always prospecting, always reaching out to people. And it's essentially it's just to automate all the pipeline work, and whether that's autonomous or whatever. But I do see a world where essentially machine learning and generative AI is crunching essentially trillions of lines of code, and it's just much smarter, faster, and cheaper than me. So that means, it's kind of, removing myself from the equation or removing the human from the equation, because big data and autonomous is just much smarter, faster, cheaper, and all that stuff, right? So that's really the goal with it, is really to make the whole work sort of more seamless, much smarter. And yeah, that's my kind of personal goal really with this. But it's to help companies ultimately to make their sales teams leaner and meaner. And to do that, the software has to do a lot more legwork. And the inspiration that I'm getting to build all of this is from the world of marketing, essentially, where in the world of marketing, you already have machine learning and generative AI running there, doing crazy stuff, whether that's videos, images, text, whatever. There's a lot of cool things already happen in the world of marketing. A lot of these things don't happen actually in the world of sales, because the world of sales has a lot of problems, like, for example, not enough data to work on or crunch. Because, for example, in every customer sort of CRM, typically 99% of the customers don't have enough structured label data that you can do something with it. So that's something, for example, that we're looking to solve. So yeah, I do see fewer humans in sales and then more output. But it's for the better, both for the companies, so the sellers, but also for the buyers. And ultimately, we're gonna be headed to a world where, let's call it an AI agent will talk to another AI agent rather than a human to a human. I do believe that will be a reality, because both on the buyer side, that will be more efficient, and on the seller side, that will be more efficient to essentially do a transaction. And that's something we're probably going to see in about 5-10 years time. So that's quite exciting. And so we're building a lot of stuff on the seller side, but we're also going to start building at some point also Forges on the buyer side.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that answer. And yeah, we'll see what happens with AI. And for people listening, my advice is always do what you can now and don't worry way too ahead, because ultimately implementing deliverability practices and sending cold emails, that's going to be your best, most actionable thing. So it's exciting to see how AI comes, but even if you have your best AI personalized line and you have AI written cold email script, if you're in spam, it does not matter. So I think that's exciting, but everybody remember deliverability practices, which is why you should check out tools like Salesforge. And as a last question, where can people go to learn more about you? Where do you want people to learn about you or your companies, just so I know what to include in the description so everybody can check out all you're about?
I mean, it's just LinkedIn, so typically that's where I hang out. So LinkedIn is a profile I started over 10 years ago, back in my days at uni. And since then, I always have it, and that's where I communicate most of my time. But yeah, you can also find me on X, naturally, etc. Just I'm less active there, more active on LinkedIn, which is where we see our, I guess, ideal customer profile as well, hanging out. And we can, I share typically stuff on everything I do as a founder, stuff, any updates on Salesforce naturally, but also some, tips and tricks on deliverability, sales, or, as a sales leader, whatever. So yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, Frank, I will have those links in the description, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks. Have a good one.
All right.